My guest today is State Representative Elizabeth Fiedler, who represents Philadelphia. Representative, you've been at the forefront of the effort to extend eviction and foreclosure moratoriums. For our viewers who might not necessarily be familiar with the term, what are eviction and foreclosure moratoriums?
Sure. So I have been working very hard on extending the eviction and foreclosure moratoriums. They ensure that people are able to have a roof over their head for the next couple of months. The governor thus far has put in place this moratorium, so saying no one can be evicted and people cannot be evicted or foreclosed upon until August 31st. I, along with many of my colleagues, have been pushing for an extension of that date. We know that August 31st will be here before we know it, very quickly. And also we know that based on all the advice and scientific research from public health folks, we know that the coronavirus and our situation right now with the economy and jobs and unemployment will not be resolved by August 31st. There's no way that that's going to happen. We wish it would, but we know that that's not feasible given especially what we know about COVID-19 and the damage that's been done for our economy since March. So we've been really pushing to have this foreclosure moratorium extended until the end of the year and to have the governor come up with a 6-month plan that will give folks an idea of what's to come. How is the state going to help? Whether that's state funding or redistribution of federal dollars, how is the state prepared to step up in a really big way and make sure that everybody has a roof over their homes, right? One thing that we have heard so often during COVID-19 is to stay home. That's how you can help save lives, is wear a mask and stay home unless you need to go out. We've heard that over and over for months. And so we really want to make sure that everybody has that roof over their head and that they know they'll have it next month and the month after that. Because one thing that's so challenging for families is the idea of instability, right? And not knowing what's to come. And nobody during this pandemic should fear that they're going to lose their home, whether that would be to eviction or foreclosure.
Now, these eviction moratoriums, as far as my understanding is that they just prevent eviction courts from working. Is there anything more complex to it than that?
So in Philadelphia, we do also, local municipalities can have their own decisions made by about local courts and whether they would function, but that's really the cases you laid out, and it's really within the governor's purview to decide to put this sort of thing in place to make sure that it doesn't happen. The banks also certainly play a role, especially when it comes to foreclosures, and I know that various electeds, including the Attorney General of Pennsylvania, have been in communication with different banks that hold many of the mortgages across Pennsylvania.
Now, for our viewers, they might have heard that the federal moratorium is ending, but does that supersede or overlap in any way with the state moratorium?
So in Pennsylvania, we have one until August 31st. That is in place at per the governor, Governor Wolf. And, like I said, we know that in addition to that moratorium, we need much more than that. We need a financial path for families to be able to follow, to get direct help to pay their bills. Someone who has not been able to make their full rent or mortgage payment maybe since March. Maybe they lost their job since March. We know a lot of people are in that situation or had their hours reduced. If they haven't been able to make money or make as much money as they were before, all the way back since March or since April, we know that realistically when this moratorium expires, many of those people are going to be at risk of losing their homes because they're not going to have the money saved to be able to pay all of that back rent or all of those back mortgage payments. That's one thing that I've heard from a lot of constituents here that's incredibly important to me to emphasize, right? It's not just a question of pushing back the date as to when this thing would happen, but actually making sure that we're protecting people when and if it does expire. So that's finances, that's making sure people, we have a bigger pot of money. Obviously, we have a lot of CARES funding that we could distribute for various purposes. As a state, we could step up in different financial ways. Make sure we have a big enough pot of money to support all the people across Pennsylvania who face this. And then also talking about planning when it does come to this, right? Are we ensuring that every single person has quality legal representation if it does get to the point where there is a case filed against them? We're talking about a lot of working people, a lot of poor people, a lot of middle class people, people who have worked very, very hard, and people who, no one should live in fear that they're going to lose their home. I believe that very firmly. Housing is a human right, and we should all have a place to call home. I've spoken with a number of people who have talked about the physical importance of a home, but also what it means to them. It's where they raised their kids. It's where they celebrated milestones, where they mourn the passing of a parent or a loved one, right? Home is something that is more than the physical building. It allows us to be part of a community. We know our neighbors. We participate in our civic associations, right? So I think it's also incredibly important as a state that we recognize the trauma that a mass amount of evictions and foreclosures would do to an individual and a family, but also to communities across the state. That's not something that's good for anybody. So that's why I have been working so hard on this, and I'm really committed to pushing on it and continuing to.
For some of our viewers who might not know exactly how many people this is affecting, there was a recent Census Bureau data release that suggested that 40% of Pennsylvania renters are facing this kind of crisis. So this has to be something that you're hearing a lot about from your constituents.
It really is, and the numbers, when we look at the Great Recession and past times when our country really faced tremendous economic challenges, and when our families face tremendous economic challenges, the numbers that we're seeing this time are as big, or if not bigger. And it's really, someone said to me the other day, who has worked for quite a long time in this field, has said, if people don't know someone who's already been evicted or foreclosed upon, they soon will know someone who is in that situation, and probably know a number of people. So your point is well taken, that it is going to be a tsunami, a crisis, and it's something that as a state we absolutely need to plan for. We need to be planning for it coming up during the next month as we approach that moratorium, so that when we're on the eve of that moratorium, we don't have a situation repeated where families are wondering if that's what's about to happen, unless it's extended. We need to really have a plan for people.
Well, we're speaking on Friday, July 31st, which is when the Senate and House in Washington have kind of walked away from the table briefly, and unemployment benefits are running out. So how does the loss of that extra $600 a week affect this crisis?
It's tremendously painful for a lot of families, a lot of people who are truly living in fear that they're about to be pushed out of their home, that they won't have enough money to buy food, to keep their electric, to keep their car, are wondering at the same time how they're going to juggle all of the other parts that come with this pandemic, whether it's having children home from daycare or from schooling, also being in charge of virtual schooling the child, trying to juggle all those pieces, also trying to get to their, make sure that they continue their jobs so that they can keep their jobs, struggling with health insurance, right? All these things that we already laid on to working people that they had to deal with. A healthcare system that doesn't allow them to go to the doctor when they're sick and charges them exorbitant bills when they are trying to just seek healthcare to be healthy and alive. All of these things, underfunded public schools that are full of lead and asbestos and don't have proper ventilation, overcrowded classrooms, right? All these things that already existed before the pandemic has just it made some of them even worse and then added other ones on. And so I think it's really a time that, as we see what's happening unfolding in DC, as a state, we need to be stepping up and saying we are 100% committed to fighting for the working people of Pennsylvania and to making sure that poor working people, middle-class people, everyone has a roof over their home, has all of the basics that they need and more. And we're really going to invest in our public infrastructure, be that our schools, our public buildings, our rec centers. We're really going to invest in them as a job creation strategy, and because it makes all of our communities stronger.
On that note, is there anything happening in Harrisburg to kind of work some of these issues out, or are we just sitting here spinning our wheels?
I am working incredibly hard, along with some of my colleagues, to push for the allotment of federal dollars to some of the places that I just mentioned, the real building blocks of our society and our public infrastructure, the things that make a real difference in the lives of working people in my district and across Pennsylvania. We are seeing partisan challenges in Harrisburg in the same way that we see them at times in DC. And I'm hopeful that as elected officials who are there to serve our constituents, people living in other parts of Pennsylvania, whether they live in Philadelphia or somewhere else, are facing very, very similar challenges when it comes to evictions and foreclosures, when it comes to schooling, when it comes to healthcare. So I remain, dedicated to fighting for those things, and at the same time recognizing that in many ways the federal government has really dropped the ball and is really letting down a tremendous number of people who are really just trying to get by.
What can some of PCN's viewers do if they're concerned about this issue? Is there some kind of action that they can take?
Thank you for that question. I think it's important, even as we see things unfold and we are frustrated and we are angry, that we think about what you just said. What can I do? Who's the person I can call, or who's the person I can reach out to? Can I call my neighbors? We may not be physically meeting in our group meetings, our PTA meetings, but can I call them, and together on Tuesday night, we're all going to get on the phone and we're going to call Governor Wolf. And we're going to say, Governor, I am a resident of this place and I am deeply concerned about evictions and foreclosures. I want to make sure that my family and my neighbors and their families have a roof over their heads. This is something that's incredibly important to me, extending the moratorium and coming up with a financial housing plan for all of Pennsylvania so we can be, supporting our neighbors and supporting our communities. So I think calling Governor Wolf and calling also your state representatives and state representative and state senator is incredibly important, especially when people elected officials hear from people in their districts. It is very valuable information. It allows us not just to have a even more solid idea of what people want us to fight for right where we are, but also allows us to take that to our colleagues, take it to the governor and say, listen, this is what I'm hearing. I'm coming to you and speaking up in this way because this is what the people of Pennsylvania want. So I would encourage people to call the governor, their state rep, their state senator, and to call 5 or 10 of your friends and neighbors and get them to get on the phone at the same time. Do a little phone bank to make your voices heard is really important.
Well, that is all the time we have. My guest has been State Representative Elizabeth Fiedler, a Democrat from Philadelphia. Representative, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
For 25 years, PCN has proudly covered the state legislature. The heart of PCN's programming is politics and policy. Unedited coverage of Pennsylvania's House and Senate floor debates, committee meetings, budget hearings, interviews with prominent legislators, and other public policy forums. Watch all of PCN's politics and policy programs on cable and streaming. PCN, Pennsylvania Politics and Policy.
My guest today is Bill Festa, who is the president of the Pennsylvania Association of Realtors. Bill, the pandemic caused a lot of volatility in the housing market this year. When the governor shut down everything, those 2 months, what was it like to sell houses?
It was very difficult, Morgan. We were permitted to sell houses, but it had to be done virtual only. So we couldn't go into houses, we couldn't put houses up for sale, or we couldn't send photographers in. So unless someone was willing to do everything over the internet, text messaging, email, that's the only way that a sale could take place. And it happened, but it was very, very minimal.
So, how did that affect realtors? How many sales were really made? That had to affect the bottom line.
It really did. I have some statistics for the activity that took place just before the pandemic. We were showing properties. Now, this is the multiple listing service for pretty much Eastern Pennsylvania, Southeastern PA, Harrisburg, and in that area. So it's not the entire state, but just before the pandemic, we were showing houses at a rate of 31 to 34,000 homes per week. During the pandemic, 1,400 per week, 1,100 per week, 1,300 per week. So it went down considerably.
Now, after those initial months, the governor kind of loosened restrictions a little bit and let you guys back in there. How's it been since then? How's it changed the dynamic of selling a house?
It's been awesome. And it was awesome going into the pandemic. January and February were shaping up to be probably one of the better years that we've had in a while. And as soon as we came out of the pandemic, it immediately jumped right back to those numbers again.
So there's a recent article in Penn Live where you were quoted saying that the market is extremely hot for housing right now. Can you give our viewers a little bit of an idea of just how hot is it really?
Normally, a property would stay on the market on average 30 days, 45 days in a good market, in a balanced market. There were times when homes on the market were selling in under under 20 days. I think in the Philadelphia market recently, it was 19 days for the month of July at one point. In late June, early July, I think it was 16 days on the market. I'm not sure about the rest of the state, but I am sure that it can't be too far off from that. So the markets are selling. We're having multiple bids on properties. Properties are selling over asking. It's basically a seller's market right now.
Now, for our viewers who are at home, they see the economy isn't doing so great, and it might seem a little jarring to hear that the housing market is doing as well as it is. So who exactly is buying these houses?
Well, I don't have the exact demographics of who exactly is purchasing the houses, but the interest rates are at an all-time low. I mean, for a 30-year mortgage, you can get 3% interest rate. If you wanted to do a 20 or a 15-year mortgage, you can get 2.5% interest rate. Last year at this time, there were 3.75%. The year before that, they were 4%. So I think anybody that is in a position to purchase is taking advantage of the good circumstances, the good mortgage market.
Well, not only is it a good time to be a buyer looking for houses, but you're also, a good time to sell your house. Who exactly do you see selling their houses right now?
Actually, the typical seller there's a variety. There's people that might have to be selling because they're going into they're downsizing. We're seeing people that are leaving the cities and the congested areas and going into the suburban areas or the even further out rural areas to purchase a home because it's less or it's more affordable, and the what was I going to say there? It's more affordable, and the ability to work from home. That's where I was getting caught up. The ability to work from home now is not an issue. We don't have to drive in or take the train into work in the mornings anymore. Well, for some people. But as for who the sellers are, your typical move-up buyers, downsizing buyers, that I don't think has changed much.
So you're saying that the move to work from home for a lot of businesses is really spurring this change in the market where people are kind of moving more out of the cities and into the suburbs?
Yeah, suburbs and even rural areas. Yeah, we're seeing that. That's the reports that we're getting. Last week I was on a call with about 50 or 60 CRS members. CRS stands for Certified Residential Specialist. And we just had a Zoom call and a brief educational seminar. But as we were conversing, we're hearing that market, what I'm explaining to you, is happening all over the state of Pennsylvania. And we were with people from the Northwest, people from Erie, people out in the Pittsburgh area. I mean, we were spread out all over the state. And surprisingly, this is definitely a statewide real estate boom for sellers. Well, for buyers, it is a little bit difficult because now they're competing with other buyers and they're spending higher than asking price in a lot of cases. So we would prefer that the market be more balanced, that there would be more supply. Right now, we have a lot of buyers that are interested, but lack of supply. And the market is usually a better market, fair to all parties, when there's just as much supply as there is demand.
So on that note, when we're talking about housing supply, we're talking about things like new builds. Obviously, the pandemic put those on hold as well. Is there a kind of a bottleneck approaching us in the housing market where the prices are just going to surge even further?
On new construction?
Just generally, how would it affect prices?
Well, whenever there's a lack of supply, yes, the prices will be affected and will probably continue to increase. I think right now the market can sustain a 3 to 5% increase, which is about where we've been. Any more than that, I think I would be concerned.
So for our viewers at home, they might be hearing what you're saying and say, God, it's a really good time to sell my house right now. So what would
That's
the
true.
next step be for someone who would be interested?
I would have them call a realtor, a local realtor, someone that's familiar with their market, and have them do a walkthrough, have a conversation about their marketing experience and what they specifically would need to do to get their home on the market and make it attractive to the number of buyers that are out there, and get that home on the market. The National Association of Realtors are telling us that the market will probably be sustainable for the months to come. So we don't foresee a drastic increase in interest rates and things like that. So probably now is a good time to get into the market if you're a seller. Well, and the buyer for that matter.
Well, you heard the man. Now is a good time to sell your house. I've been here with Bill Festa, who is the president of the Pennsylvania Association of Realtors. Bill, thank you for your time.
And thank you, Morgan.
Travel with PCN across the state as we capture Pennsylvania's rich history and diverse culture. Journey back in time as we tour the state's many battlefields, listen to the stories of veterans, and hear insights from authors on the past. Explore agriculture with coverage of the farm show, or take a behind-the-scenes tour of how everyday items are made right in your community. Watch Pennsylvania's past and present come to life on PCN. PCN, proud to bring Pennsylvania history and culture to you.
My guest today is Senator Kristin Phillips-Hill, who is a Republican who represents parts of York County. This week, lawmakers heard from school leaders who said that they needed to be shielded from lawsuits due to COVID. Obviously, this is some legislation that is still in the drafting process. But before we get into that legislation, what does it mean to grant an entity immunity?
So what it means is that as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, we find ourselves in a really target-rich environment for lawsuits. And certainly, we never would want to prevent individuals seeking redress when there's been gross negligence or willful misconduct. But certainly, there are a lot of companies that have incurred COVID-19 related liability. We have manufacturers that quickly transitioned to produce PPE, hand sanitizer. We all heard about distilleries who transitioned to create hand sanitizer for hospitals and certain medical services. We have businesses that have opened up. They have followed CDC guidelines, Department of Health guidelines, but could potentially find themselves in an untenable situation. And Pennsylvania really has been in a serious trial and error kind of process for containing the spread, establishing protocols of treatment by medical practitioners, setting safety standards. And the process is really outside those normal assumptions about precautions and risk and responsibility and liability. And so, what we heard this week when the Senate Majority Policy Committee held a hearing on safely reopening our schools is that our school districts are really concerned about liability. Even if they do everything that they're supposed to, there are going to be people who may say you didn't do enough. And there might be people who say that the actions you've taken have impeded my child and my family's constitutional rights and could find themselves engrossed in litigation. Having served as a school board director, what I understand, I served during the Jerry Sandusky trial and served in the wake of all of the child protective services laws. And we recognize that there's a great responsibility of school districts to keep children and communities safe, but there's also the potential for great liability. And we have found in settlements that Courts often find that school districts have very deep pockets because they believe that they can just continue to raise taxes to pay settlements. And so we want school districts to do the right thing. Certainly, the General Assembly, with federal CARES dollars and other funds, we've funded public education. We've provided them with the financial resources to buy the PPE and thousands of gallons of hand sanitizer and contract with cleaning services. But we also want to make sure that they are protected. Now, many of us believed that the state's sovereign immunity laws would cover our school districts, but based on the testimony that we received earlier this week, I know this airs on Monday, so last week, the school districts and their associations do not believe that they will be adequately protected under the state sovereign immunity laws. So I've been working with Senator Lisa Baker. She is the chairwoman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, along with Senator Pat Stefano and Senator Lisa Brooks, to craft legislation to provide that protection. We use the term business, but business in this legislation really means trades, healthcare practitioners, hospitals, school districts, public school districts, as well as nonprofit organizations.
So obviously, as you mentioned, there's been a lot of emphasis on getting schools to proper PPE, being able to let them do proper distancing and things of that nature. So why are school districts still feeling like they need this if the proper precautions are being taken?
Well, I think that, again, having served as a school board director, we know that despite doing everything that we possibly can do, we can find ourselves in the midst of litigation. We're already beginning to see ads. If you've gotten COVID-19, call this law firm. You may have a case. So we're already beginning to see that. And I think certainly, look, gross negligence, those institutions that really have done wrong, that have not done everything within their ability to protect people, could in fact face significant challenges legally. But certainly those entities that have done everything that they're supposed to do, we need to make sure that they are protected.
There's been a bit of discussion on social media and just in the community generally about how parents and guardians are concerned about sending their children back to school in the midst of the pandemic. Given the fact that these schools are asking for immunity, it feels like the question may be if it is even safe to send our kids back to school if the schools are admitting they need immunity.
What I will tell you is that I believe that every parent has to make the best decision for themselves and their families. And I think despite the very best efforts of everyone, they can still find themselves in the midst of litigation. And it's not uncommon. And, what we find is that, businesses that donated supplies or provided them at cost will also need to be protected if there's claims that products don't work the way they're supposed to. Nonprofits who have entered in and provided care and services to people could find themselves in a lawsuit. Medical practitioners who have done everything they can. I mean, these were really uncharted territory, and they've done everything to the best of their ability, could still find themselves in a precarious legal position. And school districts are no different than that. So that's really why this is essential.
Along a similar line, we're talking about schools in the time of COVID. It's really emphasized the need for better internet access for students, especially as the debate has been raging about whether to send them back to school or not. You've been one of the leading members in the state legislature pushing for more rural broadband across the state. Can you give us a little bit of insight about what you're looking to accomplish?
Yeah, I think that now more than ever, we recognize that the need to connect is great in a COVID-19 environment. And what originally started as a quest to provide equity of access to resources to rural students has really morphed into a need for every student across the Commonwealth. And when we saw that our schools were shut down by the governor's mandate, essentially every student found themselves learning online. And for some, that was easier than others. And I've heard that it's not just students in rural school districts. Earlier today, I was on a Zoom call with charter schools in the city of Philadelphia and the city of Pittsburgh. And they, too, need access to high-speed internet. There are internet deserts, even in the city of Philadelphia. So have started this work with my good friend across the aisle and across the Commonwealth, Representative Pam Snyder of Greene County. And, through our work, we have put together a package of legislation, and many of those bills are positioned and ready to go. We have done studies through the Legislative Budget and Finance Committee, as well as the State Government Commission. Last summer, the Senate Communications and Technology Committee that I chair held a series of hearings. We went from Indiana County up to Monroe, back down to Fayette, and finished up in Harrisburg. And, have created legislation based on that testimony, hearing from educators and business people and healthcare folks and farmers and emergency responders. Put this package of legislation together, positioned those bills. We're ready to move. We're looking at things like rolling back the regulations that have been put on the telecommunications providers. They're still required by law to have a full system of landline telephone service. 9% of their business now is landline telephone service, but they have to invest a tremendous amount of money that could be transitioned over to providing internet service that people not only want, but need. We've looked at things like Senator Pittman's legislation that would allow rural electric cooperatives. Remember, we had to electrify large swaths of the rural parts of our state through rural electric cooperatives. They have right-of-ways. They cannot run fiber optic line a foot under an electric line without totally renegotiating those lease agreements or those right-of-way agreements. So making that easier to do. We have a funding bill. We have federal CARES dollars and we have state dollars that we can repurpose into further deployment of broadband. So Senator Langerholt's bill will provide that funding vehicle. So we're also looking at how we site small cells, and passing this together will spur the investment into broadband all across the Commonwealth, from Philadelphia all the way down to Fawn Grove in York County and out to Greene County. And I think that's what we really need. And I think, with everything that we do, we hope for the best. My hope is that every child will be able to go back to school and learn in their community school or the school that their parent chooses for them. But we always have to be prepared for the worst. And having a system that provides access to high-speed internet for every student across the Commonwealth is a good thing.
Well, that's all the time we have. My guest has been Senator Kristin Phillips-Hill, a Republican from York County. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.